to really show some love, a warm welcome, as usual, as you guys have been giving all day. Our next speaker is Mr. Sam Hotchkiss.
Hey guys. Hey, wow, this just magically turned on. That's pretty cool. Man, these guys are slick. They've got everything going. This is smooth. Okay, so that's my picture, and that's my name, and this is the title of my slide. They gave you most of this information. I'm Sam. I started coding with HyperCard back in the early 1990s. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Honestly, there's kind of a push to have a resurgence of HyperCard, and I was just tweeting out about it earlier this week, so thank you. Go HyperCard. I've been doing PHP dev work since late 90s, WordPress since mid-2000s. Poland will be my 25th WordCamp of the year. It's been a very busy year. But I built Brute Protect, which is a security plugin for WordPress that you should all go download. And we got acquired by Automatic back in August, so now I work for Automatic working on Jetpack, which you guys should also install on your sites. And now we're going to talk a little bit about security. So the first thing that I want to cover here is the fact that you are not going to be 100% secure. So please don't do any single step or any combination of steps and say, I'm finished. Right? Security is not an endpoint. Security is a process. And it's a process that you always have to keep in mind and always keep thinking about and always keep evolving on. Right? I want to talk a little bit about the different types of attacks that go on, just so you can understand what's going on. Why are people trying to get into my site? What are they getting out of it? So on and so forth. The first one that we see a lot of are pharma or affiliate hacks. This is where someone's going to go into your site and they're going to change the content of your site to also include links to, say, Viagra or Cialis, things along those lines. And the interesting thing here, right, is you think, I run an online knitting store and I sell yarn. Is it really worth their while to go into my About page and say, oh, while you're shopping for yarn, you might also want some Viagra, right? You think it wouldn't make any sense. However, if you get enough sites on board with this, a good hacker or cracker who's going out and putting these affiliate links into sites can make $10,000 a day off of incoming affiliate payments. So it really does pay off, surprisingly, because it only takes 1 in 100,000 people on your knitting site to say, oh, I really do need some Viagra, and click that link, and there they go. It's paid for itself, right? Link injection, this is typically an SEO play, if you will, right? So if you've ever been trying to figure out how you can get your site ranking up in Google, or how do I get inbound links, and you go out and you Google about it, and you find someone who's saying, oh, for only $7.99, I'll give you 500 inbound links. What they're going to do is take 500 sites that they've compromised and put a link to your site. Don't do that, please. Hacktivism, another thing we see quite a bit, where someone's going to deface your site and promote some cause that they believe in, or some cause they just want to put up there to prove that they could hack into your site. Drive-by downloads, someone's going to go to your site, it's going to download a malicious piece of software that might install a virus on your computer, make it a part of a botnet that's attacking other sites, and now you've become a part of the problem. Redirection, where someone's going to go to the site for your yarn shop, and unfortunately that evil yarn shop down the street has paid some hackers to come in, and now anyone who's trying to visit your yarn shop is really going to visit the yarn shop down the street, and that's no good, right? List goes on and on. There are a lot of different reasons that people are going to hack in, but those are the ones that we see most often. And one thing that I hear quite a bit, right, is that my site is too small for people to care. And I can understand why you might feel that way, but that's simply not the way that this works, right? They're going out there, and this is 99 times out of 100, this is a completely automated process. These, they're trying to get into your site. They're trying to get into as many sites as possible and infect them. So it doesn't matter, large or small, hackers are very equal opportunity. It's important to know a little bit about your weaknesses, right? And have a better understanding of what's going on, how are people getting into my site, and how am I being unsafe in my day-to-day actions. One of the biggest ones that we see is public Wi-Fi. Now, most of you guys are doing e-commerce, I would assume, since you're here, so you're probably running an SSL certificate. Is there anyone in here who's not running an SSL certificate? Okay. There was someone, and I won't say who, but so even if a small percentage of people aren't running SSL certificates, it's still important not to connect to your site over public Wi-Fi without giving yourself some sort of extra protection, right? It's just not worth taking the risk. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can protect against that in the future. Because when you're on a public Wi-Fi network, it's possible for someone else on the network to see all of the data that's being transmitted to and from your computer. FTP. When you're uploading files to your site, how many people in here use FTP to do that? Don't do that, and I'll tell you why, and we'll go into some alternatives to using FTP. What's your hosting environment? Obviously, if you're an end user, this is something you probably don't have that much control over because it's not something you fully understand. It's not something I fully understand, right? But you want to make sure that whoever you're hosting with, they're on top of things, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. What plugins are installed on your site, both active and inactive? Same thing goes for themes. One of the common misconceptions that people have is if they have inactive plugins or inactive themes on their site, that's not opening a vulnerability. Many of the vulnerabilities that are out there go through files that exist in the plugins. If they're on your server, whether or not they're actually active, there's still a vulnerability. So if you have a plugin, if you have themes that aren't being used, please delete them off your server. There's no reason for them to be sitting there offering a potential vulnerability down the road. Is your version of Core up to date? If not, please make it so. So we're going to talk about some basic protections that everyone in here should be doing. Core up to date, plugins up to date, themes up to date. Obviously, we just talked about that. Only use plugins you trust. So this is really important when you're going out and you're trying to figure out what are the tools that are going to make my site as awesome as possible. Well, you can trust WooCommerce, right? And you can trust most of the plugins that are coming out and widely used by the community because they have lots of sets of eyes on them. But a lot of times you're going to come out and you're going to have a specific niche need, and there may be a plugin that addresses that need, and it's got 420 downloads over the last year and a half, so it's not really widely used. Maybe it hasn't been updated in a year, and this is when we get into kind of scary territory. So it's really important if you're going to use a tool like this, and it's totally okay to use a tool like this, but you need to understand what the possible vulnerabilities in that plugin are. So go through that code line by line if you're a developer and make sure that there's nothing in there that doesn't seem like it should be. Make sure that they're going through proper steps, and we'll talk a little bit about proper development steps a little bit later on. But make sure that there's nothing in there that seems out of place. If you are not a developer, if you're a store owner, so on and so forth, hire a developer or have the developer who you work with look through the code, make sure it's safe before you start using it, okay? A lot of people think if they're downloading a plugin from the WordPress plugin repository that it's automatically safe, right? That all of the code is reviewed there. The code that's on the WordPress plugin repository is reviewed when the plugin is first submitted. After that, all future updates are uploaded without being reviewed first. So it's very easy for someone to submit a plugin and then immediately update it to something that might not have gotten approved the first time through. So be really careful with what you're running on your site. It's also important to not give people more access than they need. So what this means is if you have someone who needs to access your site to, say, write a blog post for you, there's no reason they should be an administrator, right? You should have an account that's an author for them. If you have someone who maybe does need to be an administrator, that's great. Make them an administrator account, but if they only need to be an administrator, say 1 day a month, make their account an administrator for that 1 day, take it back down to being a subscriber for the rest of the month. You don't want to have all of these login credentials out there that have way more power than they need, that have the power to access and change all of your site when it's not necessary. It's also really important not to send passwords through email. And actually, one more point on not giving people more access than they need. Don't share usernames and passwords between multiple people. So don't have one account that we use for all admins, and I gave everyone the same password. It makes it much harder to track down issues and isolate people and instances further down the road. One person, one login, or potentially multiple logins. There are certainly circumstances where you as a site owner may want to have an author or an editor account that you use for all of your day-to-day activities, and a separate administrator account that you keep the password tucked away, you don't ever log into it except when you need to update core, update plugins, so on and so forth. Okay, I said don't send passwords through email. I'll tell you how to address that later on. So what are some important security tools to look at when you're working on your site? Brute Protect, obviously, I highly support. It is completely free. Come and download it. It will always be completely free. We're working on integrating it into Jetpack. That'll be out in 6 or 7 months or so. And it works now as a standalone. Once it's in Jetpack, it will continue to work completely free forever. iTheme Security is great on-site, all-around protection. It does a really good job of protecting your site from a number of different attack vectors right on your site. Security, website firewall. Tony's over here, and he can answer any questions that you might have about it. But it is really the most powerful layer of protection you can add onto your site, because it actually routes all of your traffic through their servers first. So they're able to check and make sure that there's nothing malicious going on before then bringing it back to their site. Okay, next thing you need to do is develop a backup plan. And please don't say, well, my host backs up my site for me. I can't tell you the number of people who I have run into over the years who said, well, my host is handling my backups. My site is completely backed up. And then their site crashes, their site goes away, and they call their host and they say, oh, I'm sorry, our backup systems broke like 3 months ago and we've been meaning to get back around to fixing it. Completely not uncommon, even from very large hosts. So be in charge of your own destiny and control your backups. It's not a very expensive thing, and it's very good to hold on to your own data. Ways to do that: VaultPress is the solution from Automatic. It works really, really well, $5 a month. Backup Buddy from iThemes also does a great job. They have a number of different options there. WordPress Backup to Dropbox, I believe, is free, and I've heard good things. I haven't used it. BackWP Up. I have no idea what their cost structure is, but it was one that came recommended to a number of the devs that I talked to. Personally, I use VaultPress or Backup Buddy 100% of the time. It's important that you connect carefully when you're connecting to your site, right? One of the primary vectors that people are able to use to get your account credentials to get into your site are hopping in the middle when you're connecting to your site. So if you're logging into your site over public Wi-Fi, either install SSL, which luckily you all are doing, or, and this could also be use a VPN. If you're on a Mac, Cloak is awesome. It's really cool because you can install it, you pay $7 a month or something, and it automatically detects if the network you're on, it has the potential to be insecure, and if it does, it secures it for you. You don't have to think about it. It all happens completely automatically, and it works really well. Don't use FTP. We talked about this a little bit before, and I told you I was going to tell you a little bit more about it. So FTP is completely unsecured, in the clear protocol, if you will. There are 2 alternatives out there that will work on 99% of sites, SFTP or FTPS. You can put the S at the front, S at the end. They're completely different protocols, but they're both encrypted. So most sites will support SFTP, some support FTPS, but generally, if you can go into your FTP client and just select SFTP, your same credentials, everything will probably work about 80% of the time. If you're in that other 20%, you may have to contact your host, say, how do I turn on SFTP? If they only support FTP, it's time to find a new host. 100%, if that's all that they support, they don't care about your security, and it's time to get really nervous. That happens very, very rarely. Don't send passwords through email. Use a tool like quickforget.com. This was a service that I built years ago. It's completely free and super easy. You go to quickforget.com, there's a box, you put in the password, you hit submit, and you tell it how many times that password can be viewed and for how long. You hit submit, it gives you a link. So now, instead of sending an email with the username is George and the password is password, you would say the username is George and the password is at this link. And then you paste the link in. The user who's receiving it can click it, but that means if someone hacks into the email box of the person you're sending the email to 2 months from now, that link is no longer good, right? It cuts down the amount of time that something can be snatched in transport, and you can set it to 1 hour and 1 view, or 1 year and 1,000 views, but it makes that data a little bit better protected and gives it a limited lifespan. Use a password manager and secure passwords. So personally, I use 1Password. It works really well on the Mac. There's also LastPass and Passkey, something like that. LastPass is the other big one I hear talked about a lot. It's really important that you're using different passwords for every site that you're working on. And for everything that you log into. Show of hands if you use the same password in more than one place. I have a few sites that use the same password too. It's a really hard thing to get away from, especially the way that some sites work with. So, at a very bare minimum, if you're going to use the same password everywhere, at least use a different password for your email. Because if someone is able to hack a site that you have a login to and they're able to find your password because it's being stored in the clear, and that password is the same password for your email box, then they're able to go to any other site that you use and use that reset password link. And now they have access to your bank, they have access to everything else that you log into. So please, treat your email as the most secure thing that you have access to. Set a super hard password, use 2-factor. If on nothing else, use it on your email. Keep your email box secure, okay? That brings us on to use 2-factor authentication. Who in here uses 2-factor authentication? Who in here does not know what 2-factor authentication is? That's cool. So 2-factor authentication, you probably use it with your bank. That tends to be one place that everybody is sort of pushed to use it. It's where you try and log into a site, or maybe you try and make a money transfer, and it says, I'm going to text you a code. And it texts you a 4-digit code, and you have to enter that. The idea behind 2-factor authentication is you have to prove who you are in 2 different ways. So there are 3 ways that you can prove your identity, right? You can prove it with something that you know, like a password. You can prove it with something that you are, like a fingerprint or an eye scan, something like that. And you can prove it with something that you have, like your phone. So the most common form of 2-factor authentication, you're going to prove it with a password, something you know, and something that you have, your phone. So it will either send you a text, or you can use an app like Google Authenticator that will allow you to set up 2-factor. It's very easy to set up 2-factor on your email through Gmail. If you just Google 2-step, most service providers are now offering 2-factor authentication. On your WordPress site, I would highly recommend a plugin out there called Clef. And what Clef allows you to do is use your phone to log into your site. It is so cool. You go to your site, and instead of entering a username and password, you hit a button that says log in with Clef. This animation pops up on the screen. You point your phone at it, and it does a little beep, beep, booping, and logs you in. You're into your site. You don't even have to remember a password. You just have to have your phone and the PIN to your phone in order to get in. Very cool stuff. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what you need to do when you're coding. So on the other side of things, when you're developing a site for someone or you're working on the code for a site, I'm not going to get into code examples and all of that stuff. My goal here is to tell you the things that you should be thinking about down the road. So if any of this is not familiar to you, please write it down and do a little bit more research and integrate it into the tools that you're building. So first thing you need to do is sanitize everything before you save it. When someone submits a form onto your website, you should be taking that data, making sure that there's nothing malicious in it, sanitizing it, before you put it into your database. On the flip side, when you pull something out of your database or when you're showing anything on the front end, we want to make sure that we escape it. So that's going to make sure if this shouldn't have JavaScript in it, let's make sure it doesn't have JavaScript in it. If this shouldn't have an iframe in it, let's make sure it doesn't have an iframe in it. There are a ton of really good tools for sanitization and escaping of data built right into WordPress. It's super easy to use, and once you get into the habit of it, it adds no time to your development process. You just need to have sort of a basic understanding of the tools that are out there. Nonce every form and URL. So obviously not every URL on the front end, but anytime that someone is clicking a link that is only available to them, right? That's not taking them to a public-facing page. Maybe it's doing an action that should be nonced. And what noncing is, a nonce is a number we use once, right? So if you click a link, that link only works once because we're verifying it with a nonce. If you're submitting a form, submitting that form only works once so that we know that someone hasn't hopped in the middle and submitted a different form to the same endpoint. If you're writing integrations with APIs, don't ever use curl directly. Use WP Remote Get. WP Remote Get allows you to, there's also WP Remote Post. These wrappers use WordPress's libraries to do exactly the same thing, but you know that they're being kept up to date. So if there's a vulnerability, for example, it's going to get patched in core. That update's going to get pushed automatically as a point release, and you're off to the races. You're kept secure and not having to go back and maintain your legacy code. Okay? So when you do get hacked, and it'll probably happen eventually, first thing you want to do, high points here, change all of your passwords. Second thing, back up all of your files. Third thing, burn it all to the ground. We want to get rid of everything on the server. If you can wipe out the entire VPS and build it up again, great. We want to make sure that things aren't hiding. Then you want to replace everything that you can. I flipped those two. Okay. Imagine that replace everything that you can with fresh copies is up one line. So, core, plugins, all of that, download fresh copies and use those. Anything that you have that's custom to your site, you're going to need to go through and check every file, make sure that there's not anything malicious in there. If you want to be absolutely sure that it's not in there. You can also call Tony and he'll do it for you. Then you want to check your cron file and make sure that they haven't set this up to come back every 12 hours. I can tell you one of the sites that we worked on at my agency was a very large multi-site network, about 2,500 sites, and they got hacked and woke me up at 5 o'clock in the morning saying, Sam, we got hacked, what do we do? And so me and 3 of my guys spent all day going through and checking everything, cleaning everything up. And finally, by 6 o'clock in the evening, we were done. We were really happy about it. And we went down to the bar and we had our first glass of whiskey. And my phone goes off. They said, it's all back. And we went back and looked, and the hackers had put a line into the cron file that every 6 hours it would go back out and see, well, if they fixed it, let's re-download the hack and reapply it. That sucked. So check your cron file. Once you've done all of this, change your passwords one more time. Make sure they haven't gotten out there. I have questions in 1 sec. Yes, yeah, make another backup once you have everything cleaned up to make sure that you have a known good copy. And that's another good argument for backups, right? If your content isn't changing all that often, if you can roll back to a backup from a couple days ago before the hack happened, that's most of your work done for you, so that makes it a lot easier. Anyway, once you get through all of that, change all of your passwords again, change your SSH keys, change everything, make sure that anyone who may have been able to get in before can no longer get in, and that's when you can pour yourself a drink. So, with that, I will take any questions.
Going back and checking and make sure none of your files have any malicious code in them. But I have no idea how to go back and check the database itself, which is generally, thousands of records. How do I find out there's something injected there?
Checking the database is incredibly painful if you have a ton of stuff in your site. Tony may have a better answer for this than I do. In my experience, I go back through and either I or someone on my team will go through and manually look through everything to make sure that there's nothing that looks out of place. Right. So that is a good time to call security. Yeah. So Tony, the goal of security is also to make your site faster, right? A little bit? Yeah. So what he was asking is if running through the security firewall is going to slow your site down. Tony says no. Yeah. So what he was saying is they do a lot of caching and then geo-CDN balancing, so they will actually deliver a cached version of the site from a data center closer to the person who's looking at the site. So in theory, it should make things faster.
What about using privatized Git repos in the back over here?
Yes.
Using your own privatized Git repos for all your sites.
So using Git repos for your sites is a good thing, but don't put the Git folder onto your server. So the way that we use Git, so I'd done agency work for a long time, and the way that we would manage Git in order to make sure to keep things secure, if you have your .git folder on your server, at least make sure that you're protecting it in htaccess. But what we would do is we had private Git repos, and then we'd use either deploy.io or Beanstalk to automatically push updates to certain branches out to certain servers, which worked out really well, right? Because we could push to our dev branch and have it automatically deployed to all of our dev servers, tested in different environments, and then we could manually deploy that to our production server. Yeah. You can certainly do it with rsync or something like that. Deploy.io and Beanstalk make it super drop dead simple. I hate managing servers, so to me that was well worth the $50 a month or whatever.
Yeah, he mentioned security. Do you have any thoughts about it? I've used it before, but I mean, as far as slowing down the site or
security works very well. In my experience with it, it's worked really well, and I'm not an expert in their product, but Tony is here with a security shirt on, so he can help you. Actually, he's not here, and he can't help you.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey. there was talk about using your backups during the de-hacking process. I'd say that that's a dangerous thing to do because you can't. Sometimes you don't know, like until a few months after you've been hacked,
Right.
that you've been hacked. So you can't trust your backup either.
Well, but if you can identify where the hack came from, and then you can go back through your backups and find the point where it was introduced.
Yeah, but you don't have git bisect in your backup, so that can be long too. It's
Right. No, it's certainly not as easy as going back and looking through Git logs. But that said, you know, if you find there's yeah.
I'll just use my outside voice. So from a hacking perspective, you're absolutely right from a backups, right? Everybody likes to talk about backups because it's very valuable. But one of the things that I like to also recommend folks is leverage, like for instance, Core. Core is a very easy one not to leverage your backups for, right? And the thing is that Core gets leveraged a lot for backdoors, which is what he was talking about. Well, they inserted a cron in his instance, but backups are essentially their gateway in that bypass all your access controls. So by being able to replace Core outright, and don't go to WP admin and say reinstall. Actually go into SFTP, remove WP admin, remove WP includes, and download fresh installs. Same with all your plugins. If you can get a fresh install of your premium plugins or your open plugins, etc., that won't address your specific instance because the backups could still be an issue. But if you can have at least 60 days is what usually my recommendation is. You can start doing some diffs and comparisons. If you don't know what you're looking for, you're always going to have that issue, right? Well, what is the issue? I'm just a business owner. I'm not a dev. I mean, but so you have a good point, but it's better than what most have.
Hey,
Monkey hat.
That was a really great presentation. Like, it made me
Thank you.
very paranoid.
Don't be paranoid. Just be on the lookout.
Yeah, but just from
He's behind you.
the server admin kind of perspective, what are some good tools to know if you have been hacked? Like someone might have a botnet on my server or something, and what's the best way to find out if you have been hacked?
How to know if you have been hacked?
Yeah.
So Security has a site check tool that works really well. You want to come up here, Tony?
No, I don't. I actually hate doing this, but for sysadmins, one of the things you can leverage is ClamAV has a really good server-based kind of malware detection type stuff. You could also leverage OSEC, and what OSEC allows you to do is a host intrusion detection system.
Can you spell those?
OSEC is OSSEC,
Yeah.
and ClamAV is Clam, C-L-A-M-A-V. They have a server-based monitoring thing. But the reason I like OSEC, and I run it on a lot of my VPSs, is it allows me to monitor all my ports. What's my outgoing, what's my incoming, things like that. It also allows you to do like integrity checks. You can define specific directories. Did something change? Did something not change? Things like that, which is more in line with what you're looking for. It also has like a rootkit kind of detection mechanism that allows you to see, hey, did a rootkit get installed? Did somebody modify Apache modules? Things like that.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you so much, guys. Unfortunately, we're going to have to stop there, but I'm sure...
Please find Sam and ask him any questions.
Yeah, please hit Sam up on Twitter, Sam Hotchkiss.